Classical education does not have to be Christian, but does have to be religious. Christians are commanded to give a religious education to their children. We here are seeking both a Christian and a classical education. But also, we would say there is such a thing as a Muslim classical education or a pagan classical education. There is such a thing as a classical education that is not Christian, but is religious. But there is no such thing as a secular classical education.
Welcome to Scholé Sisters, the podcast for classical homeschooling mamas who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. Scholé Sisters discusses topics that matter to those of us who believe that educating ourselves through reading widely, thinking deeply, and applying faithfully equips us for the task of educating our children. I'm your host, Brandy Venzel. You can come study Charlotte Mason with me over in the Charlotte Mason Think Tank. Go to afterthoughtsblog.net/think tank to learn more. My co-hosts today are Misty Winkler and Abby Wall. Misty is a homeschooling mom of 5, including 1 graduate. She writes and podcasts at simplyconvivial.com and is the author of The Convivial Homeschool, now available on Amazon. Abby is basically the queen of the Scholé Sistership. Abby is a country-living farmer, rancher, a loving wife, and mom of 5 who homeschools and reads whenever she can. Have you joined the Scholé Sistership yet? In January, we kicked off our annual 5x5 reading challenge. It's not too late to join us. All you have to do is head on over to scholésisters.com/join and sign up for the Sophie plan. And in addition to a replay of our big kickoff webinar, you'll get tons of accountability, book ideas, and support. That's scholésisters.com/join. Is real education necessarily religious? And if so, where does that leave modern claims to a secular education? These are the questions we raise in today's episode. And so, without further ado, let's get to it.
Let's start off with our Scholé every day. Who would like to go first?
I can go first. This is Abby, and I just started, so I'm 6 or 7 chapters into East of Eden. It is a very, very large book because John Steinbeck is a good writer, and he writes beautifully, actually. He's got some really interesting things to say. I'm listening to it on audio, so I don't remember how many hours, but it's definitely over 20, maybe over 30 hours, but I listen to it really fast. But he is talking about this woman, and he's describing her as this staunch, from Puritan stock. He might even say Presbyterian. And he said, but she must have had, I want to say the hip bones with, whale bones backing it, because she could just birth kids. And it was just so funny how he wrote this thing. And I'm butchering it because I was listening to it, but I was like, oh, I've got to go back and find this. But I don't have a copy of it. I'm waiting for mine at the library to highlight some of these things. But it was so funny how he described this woman of who never smiled and was just very austere, and but she could really birth kids, no problem.
Well, so everybody should have a talent.
Her pelvis had the strength of a whale bone. That's what it was. So it made me funny. But he's very descriptive. It's the only other Steinbeck I think I've ever read. I might have read Mice and Men, but I can't remember. Is the one that everyone has to read in high school, which is Grapes of Wrath. So that's my only other thing. But I appreciate him much more now as an adult than I did when it was being force fed, down my throat. So
maybe I should try him again. I don't know. My grandma always tried to get me to read him, and I just never.
Well, he talks about California, and he's talking about all the names of California and what they mean and where they came from the Spanish influence and the Indian. It's pretty incredible, actually. He is
the great California writer. His style has always bothered me. I don't know. I remember reading about this turtle crossing a road, and I just wanted to die. But I was thinking about this later. One time I heard someone describing Robinson Crusoe, which they read as a child, and they thought the whole thing was about making raisins. Just how your child mind sometimes exaggerates one part of a book.
Yeah.
There is a part of me that's like, I wonder if between bringing a book to my grandma's house and wanting to read my own thing and having Steinbeck like thrust upon me and insisted upon, between that and probably not being mature enough to actually read him.
Yeah.
Maybe the whole book wasn't about a desert. I mean, I even love desert tortoises, but I didn't particularly want to read about one trying to cross this road. So,
well, and I got nervous because you know how, and I don't know what the stylistic, I don't know what it's called, but how he interposes the landscape with the narrative about the people in Grapes of Wrath. He starts out like that. And I was like, oh, dang it. We're going to do that again.
See, that's what
I mean, because sometimes they're really long. I mean, it's good, but it's like, sometimes you just want to get to the meat of the story and, or the narrative part, right? With fiction, I think that's true. But he starts out that way, explaining like the history and the names of things. But then as far as I can tell, he's not doing it again. So it was just kind of the introductory thing. And it was actually, I mean, I appreciated it from there. I was like, okay, this is what he does in all of his novels, but apparently not.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll try it sometime. I mean, I do like to try to read the great California authors.
Sure.
And I just kind of read my way around Steinbeck. So maybe I should turn over a new leaf sometime.
Okay, well, I'll go next.
All right.
My first book of 2023, my first start and my first finish. It helped. I did it on audio and it was only about 5.5 hours.
Oh, wow.
Nice and short.
So giving myself a small win for my 5x5 challenge in the theology section. I read The Forgotten Trinity by James White.
I have never read that. I've heard of it.
Quinn read, my oldest bought that when we were up at the book sale. And I think he read that last year or 2 years ago.
Yeah. I've never read a book just about the Trinity. You know, I've read theology books that have sections on the Trinity.
Right.
So, and I've never read any James White. So I thought I'd give it a shot. And, you know, I think I was expecting something more like Matthew Barrett's None Greater. And it wasn't quite that. You know, Barrett kind of meditates on the different aspects of God's character. Yeah. And this one touched on some of those aspects, but I guess James White is known as a debater.
Oh.
And so he debates on the Trinity. And so this is written for your average parishioner, average reader who has questions about the Trinity, but it's not really a systematic approach.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not equally, it doesn't give equal time, I guess, to the different elements. So half the book was actually about the deity of Christ. So he spent the most time where people have the biggest problems, I guess.
Okay.
So he addressed the different questions that he has received over the years of having this conversation many, many times. So it was really interesting just how painstakingly and from many different angles he made the case for the deity of Christ. Because I just went into it. He's writing it for Christians. I'm like, wait a second. Like, if you're a Christian, Jesus's God is, I think, pretty basic.
Pretty basic.
I thought that this was about the Trinity, which is a more difficult concept. So it was just really interesting to kind of get a little peek into the troubles a lot of people have with basic Christianity.
Maybe it was written for J-Dubs.
Yeah, it actually, he addressed, I think it was written for Christians who were maybe thrown off by the J-Dubs arguments.
Okay.
So, who is J-Dubs?
Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's okay. I'm sure I'm not the only one who knew what that was.
You don't have cult slang? Just kidding.
No.
Although my favorite part, I think, in the book is where he talks about a difference in function does not equal inferiority.
Yes.
And I was like, we just need to play this part over and over again because it is actually so basic to the way the world is and works, because it's very basic to the very nature of God. And yet he did spend a lot of time on it because this is not a category people have. It just made me realize, some of the different feminist men and women stuff really also boils down to not understanding that difference in function has nothing to do with inferiority or superiority.
Yep. So
pointing
true.
out that there are equality is not sameness.
Yeah.
So apparently it gets people into Trinitarian heresy as well as social problems.
Oh, packs a punch.
Yeah.
So a worthwhile short read. I
Sounds like it.
Yeah. I'm glad. Well, then I'm glad it's on my bookshelf.
I might have to get it. But I'm not buying a book today. So someone else is going to have to make it. Someone else is going to have to make this an episode. I'm just not shopping today. Not in the mood to spend more money. Okay. So mine is my latest Louis L'Amour novel, To the Far Blue Mountains. I've decided I super love Louis L'Amour. I feel like I missed out on reading him as a child because the covers were Western and I was snobby. And so I was like, why would I read that? And it looked like something an old man would read on the cover. And so I didn't read it and I had no idea what I was missing. I mean, I loved Lonesome Gods, which all of us have read.
Yes.
But I didn't really get into reading him seriously as an author until after my summer book club did Education of a Wandering Man, which is his memoir about his own education, and realizing that he was probably one of the best bred, self-educated people that have walked the modern world. I just gained enough respect for him that I was like, I think I need to just read him. I decided that we would, as a family, dig into a series this year instead of me choosing random standalone books. He wrote a lot of series, so it's even hard to find ones that stand alone. and sometimes I've accidentally bought series and not realized it. And anyway, so we're doing the Sackett's series. He actually goes back to England and traces a family, a man named Barnabas Sackett, who moves to the United States. So he's in Queen Elizabeth's era in the first book of the series. And he's going to trace this family through multiple books. I don't know, it's 15 books or something, all the way to the Old West, basically. So he doesn't bring them all the way into modern times, but he gets really, really close. So he's bringing them through hundreds of years of history, just book after book. So this is the second one. We read the first one.
What's the name of the first one?
So the first one is, I think it's Sackett's Land.
Okay.
And then this one is To the Far Blue Mountains. And it has to do with in the first book, when he first goes to the New World. I mean, they're not even colonies yet. They're calling it Raleigh's Land half the time. And he sees in the distance the Blue Mountains. And I can't even remember exactly where they landed, but he can see, I don't know if it's the Appalachians or I'm not sure what he's seeing, but he sees these mountains and he has this longing to cross them and see what's on the other side. He just can't stand it. He's obsessed. He wants to go. And so he does have that spirit of adventure that the early Americans had. I feel like L'Amour he really grasps why people came here, what they were about, the things that he says about things like freedom and privilege. This guy is a poor guy who happened to have, his dad happened to be granted land when he was fighting for some king in a war. So they had this little bit of land, but he understands that it's different in America, that there's no hierarchy here. There's no lords coming after you. There's no rich people trying to run your life for you. I'm like, what? I'm like, there's no World Economic Forum. I mean, nothing. It's just so good. But
Brandy.
So this is, I know, I couldn't help it.
We're going to start finding you for your political comments.
This is a quarter jar.
Yeah.
I have to pay for the retreat.
Yeah.
It's not an episode until ships.
Yeah.
There you go. So there's this section. I was going to read it to you. It's not super long. It's less than a page. It's a couple paragraphs though. But so he's thinking about his immigration and all of a sudden it dawns on him that he needs to bring books. he's been thinking about like what supplies he needs, what can he trade with the Indians when he gets there, like that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden he's got a girl that's going to come with him. She's going to marry him. So he starts thinking about it. And I love what he said. I'm going to read it to you really quick. So he says, it was born then, this idea that I must have books, not only for our children, but for Abigail and myself. We must not lose touch with what we were, with what we had been. We must not allow the well of our history to dry up. For a child without tradition is a child crippled before the world. Tradition can also be an anchor of stability and a shield to guard one from irresponsibility and hasty decision. What books then? They must be few, for the luggage of books is no easy thing when they must be carried in canoes, packs, and upon one's back. Each book must be one worth rereading many times. Each a book that has much to say, that can lend meaning to a life, help in decisions, comfort one during moments of loneliness. One needed a chance to listen to the words of other men who had lived their lives, to share with them trials and troubles by day and by night, in home or in the markets of cities. The Bible, of course, for aside from religion, there is much to be learned of men and their ways in the Bible. It is also a source of comments made of references and figures of speech. No man could consider himself educated without some knowledge of it. Plutarch also.
Okay. I was also, can I just say, I was going to guess the Bible, Plutarch, and Shakespeare. Those were my three guesses.
Well, I'll tell you, he doesn't get past Plutarch, but yes, okay. I think that would have been his third if he had said it. Yeah. So he says, Plutarch also, my father, a self-educated man, placed much weight upon him. He was, I quote my father, urbane, sophisticated, and intelligent, giving a sense of calmness and consideration to all he wrote. I think, my father said, that more great men have read him than perhaps any other book.
Love it.
That was less than 1 page. This book is so good.
Yeah. So Matt, my husband is not a prolific reader now, but when he was young, I think he's probably read the Sackett series probably 3 or 4 times.
Oh, really?
He loves those. Anytime we're on vacation or something like that, he'll bring along, or he'll just buy a couple copies of a couple different Sacketts, and he loves them. So he grew up on these stories. Yep.
They really are great.
Lord of the Rings, he reread over and over and over again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like he has these wonderful moments where he's sharing these things that are so true about the world and about life and all this, but he weaves a good story. I mean, they're an adventure novel. They're interesting. He gives you insight into the political tensions of the day and the history of what's going on. I mean, there's so much to them. Like I said, I'm just so sad that I missed them as a child because I just thought I was just being snobby. I really was. I was like, that doesn't look like a Christian historical romance, does it?
And Matt will read them, and then all of a sudden he'll just start busting up laughing. They have some really funny characters.
That is true.
And he'll read quotes out to it. He's like, listen to this. This is so sassy, or something like that. He's just got a tongue on him, it's good.
So they really are a fabulous family read aloud, and they're not super not a single one of them is super long.
No, they're short.
They're little paperbacks. So they're easy to throw in a purse, take on a trip. They're just lightweight, the whole thing. So highly recommend.
Nice.
Hello, Abby here to tell you about Sistership, the place for moms learning and growing. We embrace the call to shape culture by starting with our own education, our own library shelves, and thinking and planning how to spend our time. We need to be equipped for the great task of educating our children. Sistership is the place to talk about reading widely, a place to discuss and think deeply, and share how you are faithfully applying the ideas you encounter. Sistership is for all the women serious about education for themselves and for their families, but understand that in order to educate, we can't take ourselves too seriously. Join us in Sistership for the camaraderie and stay for the fun.
The title of this episode is Religion is Essential. When we say that something is essential, we're really making a philosophical claim. Sounds like just a cool word. Essential became a fad word.
Mm-hmm.
But we're saying that religion is inherent in the educational project, that you can't cut it out and still have, still have education, but you end up with something like job training or something. It's not full education. So we're claiming that part of the essence of what education is religious in nature. This is a really controversial thing to say because our American public schools and I mean, I don't know about schools in other countries, but I would assume that to the extent that they are touched by modernism, they're making the exact opposite claim of this. They're claiming that
Right.
they can offer your child a neutral, secular education. I want us to just dive right into the deep end of this because I feel like our listenership is such that they get that from other things that they've listened to already and things that they've read on their own. They get this tension between the Christian classical type project and the secular modern type project. So I'd like us to start by saying, what actually makes something religious? Are we saying that what makes it distinct is kind of like bumper stickers, like we slap Bible verses on things? So, at the beginning of each lesson, there's like this cutesy little verse in cursive at the top or something. Like, is that what we're talking about? Or is it something different than that?
It's not that.
It was kind of low hanging fruit. I think my 16-year-old self is disappointed that religion isn't embodied in bumper stickers because I was really into it.
So I'm also right now in the middle of How Should We Then Live? The Rise and Decline of Western Thought and Culture by Francis Schaeffer for a book club. So it'll be a Scholé every day, probably next time we record. But he is kind of drawing, it's a history of thought in the Western world. And the big difference that he sees between the Christian Middle Ages, Christendom, and modernity is located in the Enlightenment and humanism, where man decided that God was optional or non-existent. Some didn't want to go all the way to non-existent and atheistic. But if God did exist, we can still have education, philosophy, art, culture project that is independent of God, apart from God. Man becomes the center and the driving force of the project. The idea in secular humanism is that man can find meaning or purpose inside of himself. Even not any. I think that's also the claim in Buddhism, but in Christianity and in ancient paganism, there is something objective outside of man. There's truth outside. And in modernity, the source of truth is supposed to be inside of each individual. And it hasn't worked out very well. I'm just going to say it's not working out very well.
Yeah, I found a quote when I was reading to get prepared for this, and it's an R.L. Dabney quote.
Oh, yeah.
And he says this: so is a really secularized education either possible or admissible? Before ours, no people of any age, religion, or civilization has ever thought so. Against the present attempt, right or wrong, stands the whole common sense of mankind. Pagans, Catholics, Muslims, Greeks, and Protestants have all rejected any education not grounded in religion as absurd and wicked.
Mm-hmm. Absurd and wicked.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. In my mind, I've been thinking through this. And so we read, actually, I didn't say this in the intro. We read basically the first couple of chapters of Foundations of Christian Education by Louis Berkhoff and Cornelius Van Til in order to prepare for this episode. The first couple chapters of that book are talking about religion and education, really. I mean, the whole thing is, but I mean, they're being very general. They're talking about the relationship of religion to education. Mm-hmm. But what I've been teasing through is like some of what he says, I think can be very true. I guess I mean Van Til actually, because he wrote the first chapter, but some of what he says can be true of like not classical schools, like fundamentalist Christian school, cute little one-room country schoolhouses in the Old West and that kind of stuff. They weren't particularly classical, though. I think sometimes maybe they were more classical than we give them credit for, but for the sake of argument. So trying to think through. So classical education does not have to be Christian, but does have to be religious. Christians are commanded to give a religious education to their children. We here are seeking both a Christian and a classical education, But also we would say that there is such a thing as, say, a Muslim classical education or a pagan classical education. There is such a thing as a classical education that is not Christian, but is religious. But there is no such thing as a secular classical education.
Yep.
Right.
Agreed.
And I think a part of the problem here comes down to our understanding and common usage of the word secular, which I think, a generation or two ago, Christians were sold a lie that secular means neutral.
Yeah.
Secular means there's no religion, when it's actually a different religion.
Yep.
So if it's secular, it's actually, secular humanism or it's Marxist, but these do have truth claims that are anti-Christian. They still find a source of purpose or an interpretational grid. And even though it's godless, it's not like something can't be godless and neutral, actually. And so a real epiphany moment I had while reading Schaeffer's book is that he contrasted the Christian idea of an antithesis, which, Van Til is big on the antithesis, and especially this chapter we read, where you have good and evil. You're either for God or against God. The scripture is full of that kind of antithesis.
Sounds very much like the Apostle John. He's the one who really drives home this idea. There's hot and cold, but there's no lukewarm. There's this. He's always driving us to choose a side. Choose what side you're on. Take a stand. That epitomizes his epistles, at least.
Yeah. And so Van Til is emphasizing this concept of antithesis and saying if it's not Christian, it's anti-Christian, not neutral. There's no neutrality. And then Schaeffer says the development in modern thought is a move away from antithesis and to a dichotomy that separates. The names for the different categories change, but he said philosophy has always struggled with unifying particulars and universals.
Yeah.
And in the modern times, instead of trying to unify them, they make them two completely separate things that don't communicate. So there's reason and emotion, or noumenal and phenomenal, kind of depending on what philosopher you go with, they use different words. But there's what Francis Schaeffer summarizes as an upper story that's apart from reason, that's irrational in some way, and then a lower story, which is rational, and kind of ne'er the two shall interact. And so I think that assumption allows us as modern people to even have the category of thinking there can be neutrality, because God or religion is this upper story thing and doesn't touch our actions, the things that we go around and do. So we can learn about science, as if it had no relation to God.
Going back to the word neutrality, what struck me was from Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis's quote when he talks about we're bidding the gilding to be fruitful. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking that neutrality is neutered. It does not have the fullness.
Yeah, I like it.
And that was one of the things that really struck me. I was like, well, yes, there is a myth of neutrality, because what you are asking of it, it cannot do.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm kind of backtracking and going back to something Misty said, but you talked about this division and you gave a few different examples of how it's fragmented, including Schaeffer's like upper story and lower story. I wonder if that's what Charlotte Mason was addressing in her 20th principle. I never considered that maybe she had actually observed that division on a cultural level. I was just thinking she's observed it in the classroom, but I wonder now, she was an astute study of politics and culture and what was actually going on at the time, not just what had happened in the past. And I wonder if she was actually seeing this trajectory, because in Principle 20, she talks about, we shall allow no separation to grow up between the child's intellectual and spiritual life. And so she's talking about even simple things like when a child's having problems with their math, I feel very convicted saying this because I had a child having problems with math today. And did I tell him that he could pray and ask God to send the Holy Spirit and help him? No, I did not tell him that. Instead, I lectured him on algebra. But anyway, so this is a hypocrite talking right now. But she talks about that, right? That it's as simple as saying, Lord, come and meet us here in this moment. I'm having an intellectual struggle. God cares about that too. God isn't relegated to some sort of formal religion, and he's uncaring and untouched by all the other claims of life. So she's saying in her schools, the teachers are not supposed to allow that separation. They're not supposed to allow that division. The intellectual life and the spiritual life should never be parted. Ideally, it's hard for us to not do, I think. As I often tell people, like, I feel like the public school system. I don't know, Abby, I'd be curious to see if you feel this way too, because I know you weren't a Christian when you were in public school.
Yeah,
I was. And I feel like it never tempted me to atheism. But what it did was it communicated to me clearly. And I feel like it's been very hard to shake that God is just irrelevant to huge swaths of my life. Why would I consider him when I'm studying math or history or literature or anything?
Yeah.
Why? And I remember reading Schaeffer. My parents bought me like all of Schaeffer's, the whole, like the little rainbow collection they have of Schaeffer. They bought me that for like my 17th birthday. And I started reading him and I was like, whoa, there's a whole other way to think about this. I had no idea.
That's where maybe because I was a good student and I got to take classes that were superior, right? Like they were just better classes, like an AP class that I had a history teacher and and he taught Western civilization too. In those classes, you are able to talk a little bit more about that. Like he didn't separate it so much, or it wasn't such I think he was also a Christian. So I think that helps. And they're being in art classes and things like that. And when you're actually looking at classic art, so much of it is religious based because that's what, the church paid for so much. They were patrons of the arts and things like that. There was just some things that you couldn't do. But yeah, all the other subjects were divorced from that. And it was never mentioned. And I lived in a small town, so maybe it wasn't totally void, but I think now it's even...
Oh, so much worse. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there were still some remnants and there were still some teachers that were able to have a different opinion and share their faith in different ways. So, yeah.
Okay. So if we're going to say like, okay, religion is essential to education and anything that purports to be a real education is religious, are we saying that a school that claims to be secular, whether it be a public school or just a modernist school, like a private school that's modernist and not religious, are we saying that they are just so utilitarian that they're just job and skills training and they're not educating? Or are we saying that they're teaching religion and they just don't realize it? And if that is the case, are they teaching atheism or are they teaching something else?
I think there are components of pragmatism, right? And utilitarianism, sure. The job training and skills training and things like that. But they are also very much trying to shape culture, which we know that is, enculturation is education, right? The paideia of the Lord, like we are bringing up children in the fear and the admonition of the Lord. Christ is the center as Christians. And if they don't have that, then they're still trying to enculturate, which is why they're having so many issues, right? We're seeing this.
Yeah, it's still paideia and enculturation.
Yeah, it still
even
is.
If it's not Christian.
Yeah,
and even
idolatry.
If they aren't claiming it. Well, yeah, it is. So I think that the religion, like if you are not starting with God, then you are putting man in the place of God in one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it would be a false religion where man is God. And I think that some of the ideas of secular humanism are trying to hearken back to what looks like a golden age of Enlightenment, Renaissance, humanist thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But what we are seeing today is actually the fallout from that movement. And so just going back to when it started, is it going to work?
Well, it's kind of like John Dewey. Like we know John Dewey messed up a lot of stuff, but his own schools were drawing on the capital of the past.
Exactly.
They actually looked very classical. Like if you just walked through one, we would have recognized a lot of things that were going on there. In fact, a lot of what was going on there wasn't really the embodiment of what he wrote when he wrote his philosophy down.
Yeah, because it takes several generations before the philosophy works its way out.
Yep.
But I think you can read some of the early secular humanists and they sound really great. But yeah, the culture and the assumptions that they're operating on are Christian. And you can't go back to what they had now that that base is gone.
Can we switch gears and talk about evolution a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. I just have been thinking about this. And I mean, in these 2 chapters that we read, it's not talked about a lot, but it kept coming to mind for me. And it is mentioned.
Yeah.
And I don't mean like the theory of evolution. I mean the evolutionist mindset, the mindset that's in almost every like health and wellness book you buy right now.
It is.
It has to start
Yeah.
out with how you were made to be a hunter-gatherer a billion years ago. And that is your root problem. And if you could just act like a hunter-gatherer, then your whole life would be fantastic, right? Like that is what every health book is saying. And that, I mean, not that exact mindset. That's a very health and wellness mindset, but like that is the universal myth that's underlying definitely our public school system, probably other schools as well. And that contrasts with the creationist mindset. And so in the chapters that we read, it is discussed things like how evolution is not personal and Christianity is personal. And so I was thinking about this, like how does evolution bring meaning or not to the classroom? Because there was an example given of, well, yes, obviously, like he's not denying common grace. He's not saying that non-Christians can't ever be taught that 2 + 2 is 4.
Mm-hmm.
But he's more talking about the significance. A secular education cannot teach you the significance of 2 + 2 = 4. We see it in health and wellness books. We see evolution bringing this meaning to people. We would say it's a lie, but it's bringing a meaning to people. Well, how does it bring meaning to the classroom? How is that different from how Christian creationism brings meaning to the classroom or to the educational project?
See, I would question that it brings meaning. I think it brings a story that they can weave in and find supposed defense of position. Like it's woven in as proof and this story that explains why things are the way they are. But I'm philosophically, metaphysically, however, if you go deeper, there is no way that chance actually gives meaning. So I think they're relying on it for explanations, and that's different from meaning. And that's why there's so much pessimism, despair.
I think part of this is like, as Christians, we have freedoms, right? I mean, Hobbes was one, he's like, suppress the classics because that teaches people that there is freedom in Leviathan, or there's thoughts of freedom that they'll come into. And it's like, so much of the evolutionary thought, you are a slave to your genetic predispositions. You're a slave to the industrial agricultural thing. If you could just go back, you would have a more, free thing. So I think of sometimes this evolutionary ideal is like you, I do agree, Misty, that it's like an explanation of things, but how it infiltrates is I am just an accident. I'm just a cog in the machine. I'm only part of the wheel. Like it doesn't matter, right?
I can do whatever I want.
I can do whatever I want. I can be whatever I want. But those things lead us not into freedom, but into slavery. I mean, there are people who are like, well, I just, can beat this and do that. Like there are people who are out there doing interesting and incredible things, but they think that somehow they can, I don't know, evolutionary perspective, just always, there isn't that upper and lower story connection. I think some of the things that happen, like it's no basis in reason. Like you were talking about earlier, Misty. So I don't know.
It's interesting. I listen to the Dark Horse podcast pretty religiously. Religiously. Thanks for laughing at my dumb joke.
Yes.
I feel like I'm telling dad jokes now. So anyway, the hosts of the show, they're married to each other. They're both evolutionary biologists.
Okay.
And everything is through that filter. And they're very good at it. And they're super rational people. But what has been fascinating to me is they can't talk about evolution without sounding like creationists. They're always accidentally using language that ascribes intention to it. Like evolution is choosing this. And then they'll back up and be like, well, it's not really choice or whatever. They can't help but fall into creation language to the point where I think sometimes they sound like theistic evolutionists. It's hard to get away from this idea that it was on purpose in some way. So I feel like there is tension inside of thoughtful people who have devoted their lives to evolution. There still is this strange tension. And I don't know if that comes from the fact that at least one of them had a Christian upbringing, and I think the other one had a Jewish upbringing. So is it the remnants of religion that's causing this? Or is it that you just can't escape design because everything's just so beautiful and perfect? I don't know. It's just been an interesting and fascinating thing when it sounds like they've tapped into some sort of transcendent meaning of what they're observing. That's when they sound the most like a creationist. I don't want to derail this into like an evolution creation thing, but I just was thinking about how that seems to be, I don't know, if we were going to point to different myths underlying the secular religion that dominates the public school as it is right now, that has to be the central myth. Like the myths of a people group have to cover like where you came from, what's wrong with the world, and how you fix it. Those are the three main things. And I would say evolution is definitely the beginning of that. Where did the world come from? Evolution. Evolution in the form of chance with no divine hand and no existence of a God.
Well, and a lot of the really awful things in development today stem from that starting point, and then the how you fix it is taking charge of evolution and directing the next step of evolution and creating a genderless utopia. There's no outside reality that we as people ought to conform to. We are free. We are able to direct the next level of evolution because there is no ultimate direction. There can be these big leaps in kinds of being. So why not whatever we can imagine up for ourselves?
I'm not crazy. I'm making a leap.
Yeah.
So it's all the X-Men, basically.
Well, and it's so crazy because so many of the atrocities of the 20th century were just that. They're saying, well, it's survival of the fittest. So if we can kill all these people, we'll make a better future for humanity by killing all these people we think are weak. We're appalled by that and we want to denounce that, but there's no basis for denouncing it without objective truth and objective reality, which we're seeing more and more. You just can't have without God. God is the source of reality and existence and truth. And so if you say there is no God, you are saying there is no such thing as reality.
I heard someone explain one time that Darwin borrowed language from British economists that came like a generation before him. So that phrases like survival of the fittest were not invented by him.
Right.
That he was borrowing economic language that justified basically like the Scrooges of the world. Like if we think about how Scrooge talks about how unfit the poor people are and how they should just like die and decrease the surplus population, right? They're just this drag on society or whatever. I mean, that's a very evolution type of mentality, but it's a financial one. He's not tapping into Darwin. I don't know, like when, I don't know enough about the timeline to know if that would even be like a possibility. But anyway, it's just kind of an interesting thing.
Oh, they are all tied together.
Yeah.
You see that with Marxism.
Okay. Can I ask a really controversial question?
That's what we're here for, right?
I feel bad after all the hate mail, but okay. So I just am, can I bring up the charter school situation?
We can make it let's make it an extra.
Okay. So I guess I'm thinking like the public school, classical charter school movement is super hot right now. So we have like the John Adams Academies up in Northern California, and I don't know a whole lot about them other than that they're popular. That's where Stephen worked. Stephen, who did our logic class and different things in the past, right? Like he worked there.
Yeah.
There's a big similar charter school thing in Texas. There's all the Hillsdale Academies.
I think there's a bunch in Utah too.
Oh yeah, I think you're right. So there's all these organizations, they're taking public money. And in most states, not all, like in New York State and in Florida, I know for sure that public money can be used for religious education. They don't have to make that division. It's considered equal access. So because they have like a form of school choice, it changes some things. But for the most part, in California for sure, and as far as I know, in Texas for sure, these are supposed to be the typical secular neutral. They're part of the secular neutral mythology, right? But they're purporting to give a classical education. So what do you say to the parents? I really want to know. If I'm a parent, I moved to a state that offers that in my neighborhood and all the cool kids are going there and I could like stop my homeschooling and take a break and do my cross stitch and not worry about school. Right? I mean, I could see the appeal of something like that because I don't have to pay for it. The big barrier to private education is that it costs darn $10,000 a kid or something, usually by the time you're done, right? What do you say to that mom that's really tempted by that charter school, but that charter school is publicly funded and therefore claiming to be secular and required by the state to not be religious?
They're trying to buy you off. Don't be bought off.
Yeah.
It's a facade and a lie. That's what I say. It's not controversial to me. The controversial thing is I'm a homeschooler who refuses state money.
Yeah.
Right.
And even that is who takes the king's coin is the king's man. And my kids are not educated by the government.
Yep.
It's a godless government that's trying to get our kids because they aren't producing any of their own. And even if there are good people making those schools, they're utilitarian if they are going to compromise truth for money. And I'm not going to let someone who will compromise truth for money educate my children because that's the priority that will be taught by the way things are done.
Ooh, I think you should keep it in. That was great, Misty.
Well, okay, so here, let me tug at your non-existent heartstrings for a second. Because I hear this in my neighborhood a lot. But so-and-so's teacher is a Christian. And I don't mean this to say that Christians should leave the public schools as teachers. I think that can be a real ministry and all that stuff.
I do too.
Though here they're on the edge of having to, I will say, and most of them know that. But for now, they can still be in and they do good work. But my question is, so some of the moms are very tempted because they know that little Johnny's going to have Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Smith goes to this church and it's a good church. And so they're going to have a Christian teacher.
Yeah.
It has this added string of temptation, I think, that's pulling and tugging.
Yeah. And I think there's also the idea, like if you're comparing it to your average public school, I was like, yeah, that is better. I'll grant you that's better.
Yeah.
But it's not good enough. So here's the question I've been thinking about lately, and I'm not ready to make a dogmatic statement yet. Surprise, surprise.
You'll get there.
I will.
We have faith in you.
And then you'll have to cut me out of the show. So I'm reading Acts, and if the government tells someone you can talk as long as you don't talk about God, Acts is actually full of examples of this happening.
Yep.
And so I am really questioning even the idea that Christians, teach at the public schools if they'll let you, but don't let them muzzle you.
Mm-hmm.
Get fired for being a Christian. That is what the apostles did. And that is given to us for an example. If the government says, don't talk about Jesus, we're supposed to say, sorry.
Are you listening to this in a British accent?
I do have a friend. We went to church with him for years and years, and he was a public school science teacher, and he presented creation as a different theory when he was teaching his high school students. And they brought him in and reprimanded him, and he said he couldn't talk about it anymore. He said, then that's fine. I will no longer teach here. So he did get fired.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is coming. I also think at the heart of Christianity is redemption, right? It is an education that has to have that we have redemption. And so much of the public school or even these things, it's all about transactions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we are after is regenerate hearts transformation. So it's always been about transformations and not transactions for the Christian. And it's just becoming more and more impossible to have that in the public arena.
Yeah. I think we have to recognize how educational, how formative the structure and the manner and the assumptions of a system are, apart from the personal convictions of a teacher.
Yeah. The atmosphere.
Or the content even.
Yeah.
If they're saying they're going to offer your child this beautiful classical education, but they're going to divorce that from religion, then there is a sense in which they're offering a counterfeit.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the real thing. And I guess we could say, well, our kids will get a taste of the real thing. But why, when we truly have a choice?
Right.
You know, I know that there are some people who really feel like they're in a bind, they don't have a choice. So then you choose the school that you can, and you do the best with what you have.
Mm-hmm.
But like, for those of us who have a choice, why would we allow our children to have a counterfeit when they could have the real thing?
Well,
Mm-hmm.
I think when you were talking about taste, it reminded me of man cannot live on bread alone, but every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And it's like that part, okay, you can have bread alone, but that's how we are fed. That is how we are living, is from the whole counsel of God. So,
yeah.
So are we going to leave that in?
I don't know. I think this is really good and brave, but it does definitely make me nervous. I think it could really polarize some people.
You can listen to how it all flows.
Because I do have a quote that kind of goes with this that I think could wrap it up for us. If
I don't mind being the bad guy.
I mean, I feel like it's time for a change and someone else should be the bad guy. I didn't even talk about what if the government tells you can't sing during your worship service. I didn't even bring that up. I mean, I could have, and I didn't. So anyway, I mean, polarizing is fine, really. I mean, because it's antithesis, right?
Mm-hmm.
It
needs dialogue has to be sparked, not just, well, that can be true for you and not for me.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's the secular mentality, right? If truth doesn't exist outside of yourself, then you have a truth and you have a truth. And as Christians, we have to stand up and say, that's not true. Now, something can be true about you that isn't true about me, but that's different than having your own truth.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, then, is there anything you want to say before I read this final quote?
Yeah, I think that as Christians in whatever arena we're in, we have to recognize that the modern assumption that we've all been swimming in for so long is that our Christianity is a part of us closed off from other parts of the world and life, when everything is actually a whole and nothing will hang together apart from it being integrated in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So the very idea that you can be a Christian on your own time and then be neutral and unknown, unaffiliated, silent in other areas is not an idea you will ever see in scripture. It's not biblical. It's compromising.
Okay,
Yeah.
So I have one little quote, Brandy, before
go
you
for
that
it.
goes with
Sure.
Misty said. It says, education is the nurture and development of the whole man for his proper end.
Mm.
And that's the R.L. Dabney again. So,
Well, that actually goes perfectly with what I was going to read, which is
perfect.
from Foundations of Christian Education that we read.
okay.
So it's on page 33. And he says, The Christian who believes that the child is the image bearer of God naturally proceeds on the assumption that that most fundamental truth may not be ignored in any part of his education, and especially not in his school education. This fact may well be stressed in our day, in view of the fact that the influence of the Christian home is waning and that the church can devote only a couple of hours a week to the religious training of its youth. The school is easily the most important educational agency of the present. Is it not the height of folly, even from a purely educational point of view, to let the most important agency in education ignore that which is most essential and most fundamental in the life of the child? And can Christian parents reasonably expect their children to be imbued with the spirit of true religion if they persist in sending them to a school where for 24 hours a week they are taught in a spirit that is fundamentally irreligious, if not positively anti-Christian?
Mm-hmm.
And then a little bit further down, he says, America today is reaping in its churches what it has sown in its schools.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh. And 100 years later, still true.
Yeah, for real. Well, and that's the thing, is that it's really easy, I think, to get caught up in our own little particular. This is appealing to me and to my life and whatever, and to not see that what we're seeing is the accumulation of hundreds of thousands of people making the same decision to compromise.
Mm-hmm.
And what that has done to the quality of youth that we graduate from high school.
Mm-hmm.
As the schools have degenerated, that quality has gone down. Even in my day, I would say it was still running on a few fumes of religion in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
In the government classes, I would say we still studied
Sure.
original documents with respect. I'm not sure that's happening now.
Right.
Anyway, well,
Whew.
I suppose we could invite people to, if they would like to come and debate this, there will be notes showing up.
Yeah.
In the sistership, and people
Yes.
will be discussing this, and they may tell
Yes.
us they think we're wrong.
And we welcome the dialogue,
Yeah, for
because
sure.
that's
Yeah.
how we learn and grow.
The thing I love about the sistership is that these great and somewhat difficult discussions happen without anyone getting personal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible.
It really is remarkable.
That it's a group of women that actually have reasonable conversation.
See?
There's no drama.
Unicorns are real. All right. Well, thanks for coming and getting my blood pressure going.
Oh my goodness. I'm gonna wake up tonight and just be sweating. I'm sure. I'm gonna have to pray about this.
Go do some burpees.
There you
Abby.
go.
There you go. I'm like, was it just me, or was Abby the one that said, I think you should leave it in?
I was.
We're gonna use
and
it
I
against
stand
her.
by this.
Maybe
Maybe I'm
grave.
I'm almost 40, so maybe I'm getting bold.
There you go. It is a weird thing that happens when you turn 40. I actually do feel like you're like,
It's
you know what?
true.
I don't care anymore.
There was something that came up, and Matt was like, I don't know, are you intimidated? And I said, I'm 40. I've graduated, 2 kids. I'm not intimidated.
It's true. Yeah.
I would have been 10, 12 years ago for sure, but
Yeah.
I'm over it.
Yeah.
Well, you have the courage of many books also.
Yes. And discussions,
Mhm.
which
Yeah,
helps
that's a good
you
point.
internalize the books.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
other people saying bold and brave things, or
Yeah.
maybe maybe they shouldn't even be bold and brave, but they are in this day. And that camaraderie, knowing that I do not hold this opinion lightly or alone. Yeah.
Or alone.
Yeah.
Right. That I've actually thought through these things, and there are other people who agree with me, and it's okay to stand firm in that. And that's very encouraging. And I think we're going to need it so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would also go back to the idea that in the sistership, not everybody agrees on everything.
Yeah. Agreed.
But we
Yeah,
don't
that's
buy
true.
into cancel culture. I mean, those who do leave, that's very clear.
Sure.
I mean, so there are some people who can't handle
Those
it.
who buy into cancel culture.
Right.
leave.
But like,
Yeah.
I don't think that if you two and I disagree on something, even something that feels really important and emotionally charged, that makes us not friends anymore.
Mm-mm.
Like, I really don't believe that. Like, we have,
I mean, you're still in California and we're friends.
Yeah.
right?
So yeah. There you go. Proves
Somebody
it.
has to fight the good fight. So, I guess it'll be me. So,
Just remember whose salary your taxes pay.
On that note, thank you both for kicking off the new year with a kablooey. This is great.
It's a spicy one,
That's
people.
right. That's right. Have a great rest of your day. I'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with a friend and then discuss it with her. This is a great way to continue the conversation. All of the books and things we mentioned today are linked in our show notes. Just go to scholésisters.com/SS117 to check it out. Don't forget to sign up for the Scholé Sistership and join the 5x5 Reading Challenge support group. The 5x5 Reading Challenge really helps you read widely, which is the first step in self-education. Just go to scholésisters.com/join and become a Sophie member. In our next episode, we're going to talk about grit. What is it? Do our children need it? Do we need it? And if we all need it, well then, how do we get it? You're going to love this discussion. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon you needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters.
I'm going to put on my do not disturb because my children are technically going to be leaving at some point. My mom is here. She's taking them to get haircuts. So when, and so hopefully I will not have any disruptions, but we know how that goes. Well, I'm getting my interruption, my classic interruption. So excuse me, because there's people knocking on my door.
Yes.
Sorry.
She put a sign on so they knew to knock.
That was like knocking is the worst thing you can do.
I really need to leave, and your haircut is not my problem.
I like that was caught on audio.
Yeah. Oh, good. Excellent.
Your haircut is not my problem.
Well, it was whether or not you needed a haircut is not my problem. You can make that decision. I don't need to. My mom is here. She is taking my boys to go get haircuts because our Shakespeare play is coming up. And once you start a Shakespeare play, the director does not allow you to cut your hair. So this is the last haircut.
Good job. Good job being the bad guy.
Way to kick off a season.
Yeah.
Oh my
Let's talk about real education, people.